somewhere, tens of thousands of years ago, a small group huddled around a body they had just buried. They placed flowers beside it. They arranged the limbs with care. And here's the thing. This happened across multiple unrelated groups in different parts of the world. Long before writing, long before agriculture, that makes grief and ritual around death one of the oldest psychological threads in our species. It's also one of the hardest to actually study because minds don't fossilize. So let's actually talk about it. At first, a quick cognitive detour. It explains everything else. The human brain that buried the dead at Shanidar Cave in modern-day Iraq, roughly 60,000 years ago, was anatomically almost identical to yours. Same size, same structure, same wiring for language and memory. From a biological standpoint, ancient minds weren't primitive versions of ours. They were the same hardware, just running in a completely different world. Researcher Robin Dunbar proposed something relevant here. Back in the 1990s, he suggested that human brain size, particularly the neocortex, evolved in relation to social group size. Larger groups required more mental bandwidth just to track who owed who a favor, who could be trusted, who was a threat. This became known as the social brain hypothesis. Later research refined the exact numbers and debated them too, but the core idea holds up. A huge portion of ancient cognitive effort wasn't spent on tools or survival tasks alone. It was spent managing relationships. Just before we continue, my name is Jenna, and we just launched this channel for people passionate about psychology and human behavior. Just like you, the goal is to understand the hidden mechanisms behind people, emotions, and social interactions. If you want to help us keep going and improve the videos, think about subscribing. It's free, and it makes a huge difference for us. Okay, let's continue, which raises an interesting question. If ancient minds were this socially sophisticated, what were they actually thinking about day to day? Here's where I have to be honest. We do not know, not directly. Nobody wrote it down. There's no journal, no cave painting captioned, "Day 1, deeply anxious about the group's opinion of me." Anyone claiming to know exactly what a hunter-gatherer was feeling is simply guessing. What we can do is look at traditional societies studied by anthropologists much more recently, groups still living outside industrial and agricultural systems. Researchers observed something consistent across many unrelated cultures: an intense, near constant attention to group harmony, reputation, and reciprocity, not because these societies were simple, but because in small, interdependent groups, your standing with others was directly tied to your survival. Did prehistoric minds operate the same way? We genuinely can't say for certain, but it does suggest something. Deep social anxiety and constant social monitoring may be less of a modern condition and more of an ancient inheritance. Now, here's the frustrating part for archaeologists and psychologists alike. Figuring out how ancient people actually experienced their own thoughts is incredibly hard, and for a very unglamorous reason. Whatever was happening internally, memories, beliefs, inner monologue, none of it leaves physical remains. It doesn't fossilize. It doesn't survive thousands of years in soil. It doesn't show up neatly labeled in an archaeological dig. So, if you've heard someone confidently claim exactly how ancient humans experienced consciousness, that's not from a preserved artifact. There isn't one. What we do have are hypotheses, some more accepted than others. One of the more controversial comes from psychologist Julian Jaynes, who in the 1970s proposed what he called the bicameral mind, the idea that ancient people may have experienced their own internal thoughts as external voices, sometimes interpreted as gods or spirits speaking to them. Most cognitive scientists today are skeptical of this specific theory. The evidence is thin, and it's built largely from interpreting ancient texts rather than direct psychological data. But it's a useful example of just how much guesswork fills the space where hard evidence simply doesn't exist. Once we hit actual written history, though, the picture gets dramatically clearer because now people were writing things down. One of the oldest surviving discussions of the mind comes from ancient Egypt in texts sometimes called wisdom literature, including the instructions of Ptahhotep dating back to around 2400 BCE. It offers guidance on emotional self-control, patience, and managing anger, treating psychological discipline as something worth writing down for future generations. A few centuries later, in ancient Greece, the philosopher Aristotle wrote his treatise on the soul sometime in the 4th century BCE. It attempted to systematically explain memory, perception, emotion, and reasoning as functions of a unified psychological system, centuries before the word psychology existed. Greek and Roman physicians took it further. Hippocrates and later Galen proposed that personality and mood were governed by the balance of 4 bodily fluids, the 4 humors: blood, phlegm, black bile, and yellow bile. An excess of one supposedly explained why someone was cheerful, calm, melancholic, or short-tempered. This theory dominated Western medical thinking about the mind for well over 1,000 years. It's completely wrong biologically, but it reveals something important. Ancient people were already trying to systematically explain why humans think and feel the way they do. That instinct is ancient. So, real philosophical texts, real recorded theories going back thousands of years, but actual direct evidence of subjective ancient experience. What it truly felt like to be a specific person in that specific mind. Still almost non-existent in the historical record. Same reason as before. Inner experience doesn't survive. Ancient writers occasionally described emotional states, but modern historians remain cautious about how much of that reflects universal human experience versus the specific cultural lens of whoever happened to be writing. When you trace viral claims about how ancient people really thought back to their source, the source often turns out to be a single interpreted text or a heavily debated theory, which brings us to a genuinely wild final fact. The tools we use today to actually study the mind scientifically are almost shockingly recent. The first psychology laboratory in the world, dedicated specifically to studying mental processes experimentally, was founded by Wilhelm Wundt in Leipzig, Germany in 1879. Before that, understanding the mind was almost entirely the territory of philosophy, religion, and medicine, not controlled observation. Sigmund Freud didn't publish his theories on the unconscious mind until the early 1900s. The field of cognitive psychology, which actually studies memory, perception, and reasoning with rigorous experiments, didn't fully take shape until the 1950s and 60s. Let that sink in for a second. Humans have been thinking, worrying, grieving, and forming complex social bonds for the entire existence of our species, hundreds of thousands of years, and the scientific tools used today to study any of it systematically are barely a century and a half old. For nearly all of human history, people simply lived their entire psychological lives without anyone formally studying what was happening inside their heads, managing grief, status, fear, and connection, using nothing but instinct, culture, and whatever wisdom got passed down, generation after generation, which honestly makes it one of the most quietly impressive threads running through the entire story of being human. If this video changed the way you think about the minds of the people who came before us, subscribe to Think Within for more psychology videos that reveal the hidden patterns behind human behavior. And before you go, tell me in the comments, which part surprised you more? How recent psychology as a science actually is, or how socially sophisticated ancient minds already were? I'd love to read your thoughts. Until next time, keep questioning, keep growing, and I'll see you in the next video.